Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with SS&C Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest, Ted Shelton, expert partner at Bain Company. Ted has been on the podcast twice before to talk about automation, AI, and the hybrid workforce, among other topics. Today, he and I will be talking about generative AI, a topic that he writes and speaks on frequently. Welcome back, Ted. Why don't you reintroduce yourself to our listeners?
Thanks, Brad. Well, it's a great introduction you already gave, but I'm very happy to be here at Bain as a partner in our San Francisco office. And as you said, working with automation and artificial intelligence for our clients. Bain's been a partner with OpenAI since early in 2022, long before all of the flurry of activity following the ChatGPT introduction in November. So we've got quite a lot of experience. We're quite close to the issues that are going on. And I personally have been interested in the topic actually since college, which I won't even tell you how long ago that was. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well, it's fantastic having you back on the show. You've had quite a lot to say about generative AI and ChatGPT in your newsletter on social media titled The Infinite Future. The first question I have for you, Ted, is how do you write so much? Where do all these ideas come from? And it's one thing to get a lot of ideas, but to have a perspective on all those ideas is pretty impressive. So tell us about that.
Well, I was originally inspired to write the newsletter because I was increasingly interested since the introduction of GPT-3 in 2020 in how that technology was evolving and how it would be used. And I would talk to friends about it and find that my friends had no idea what was going on in the AI world. They just were not paying attention at all. Of course, that's all changed now since the ChatGPT introduction in November of last year. But I started writing it because I felt like people need to start understanding and using, but also being concerned about the misuse of these technologies. And I find that in terms of how I have so much to write about, this industry is moving so quickly that every single day, and I see very close to what's going on in this market because one of my primary roles as a consultant at Bain is to advise companies on what's going on. And so I pay very close attention. And even I, as close as I am to it, I'm surprised on a regular basis by new innovation and breakthrough, and also issues that are arising around these technologies. So the world is providing me with more than enough to write about. I don't need to invent anything. And all I'm trying to do is be an explainer, right? So make this a little bit more accessible, make it so that people understand what is the technology. So there's three pieces to my newsletter. Where did all this come from? So what's the background and understanding of what these technologies do? Where are we right now? What current events, like what's happening? And then periodically I will write something that's a predictive note about something that I think is coming in the future.
I think I'm going to ask ChatGPT to summarize all of your newsletter updates. Perhaps that's how I can digest them all and stay on top of them. That's my evil plan. So Ted, why don't you tell us more about Bain and AI and your long engagement in this space, including your recent partnership. You mentioned the OpenAI partnership. Tell us more about that, if you would.
Sure. Well, I think, in terms of my involvement in this space, I think I mentioned in college, I had the opportunity to study actually with an amazing professor, fellow named Scott Durwester, who was a professor studying the analysis of language using analytics. So what we now call natural language processing. And he was one of the authors of a patent called latent semantic indexing. And at the time we were playing with neural networks and trying to understand how they could be used in language analysis. And computers were just not powerful enough to do very many interesting things. But I always was sort of interested in it. And then, I became re-engaged in the topic actually as a result of IBM and the competition in which they proved that a machine could win Jeopardy, which is now a little over 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the moment that I was like, oh, all those things I studied in college, finally the computers are powerful now to do some of these things. Of course, they sort of used a brute force approach with the Jeopardy example, but it was right at that time that Google started doing some really interesting work, and Jeffrey Hinton, started publishing his work. And so it's been now a little over 10 years that I've gotten sort of re-engaged with the topic. And it happened that it corresponded with my interest in automation. And I've always thought that products like SS&C Blue Prism were sort of the on-ramp for enterprises to be able to really make use of artificial intelligence. Automation provides what I always describe as sort of an armature for AI. AI is great. You need to shovel data in, you need to get insights out, but unless you have some way of shoveling the data in and then taking the insight and doing something pragmatic with it in a process, the AI isn't necessarily going to help the enterprise. And so I always see automation and AI as being really closely linked that way. So really for the last decade of my professional career, as I've been focused on automation, I've also been thinking about and working with, various iterations of AI technology. Bain had the good fortune to always be in the right place at the right time, if you can, to be able to be introduced to the founders of OpenAI and have the opportunity to start working with them about a year and a half ago. But I think, no one was prepared for the excitement in the marketplace that the introduction of ChatGPT created. In fact, one of the founders there said, would anyone in their right mind launch a major product between Thanksgiving and Christmas? Like, we had no idea that people were going to respond in the way they did. It ruined our holidays because it's sort of all hands on deck, running around trying to keep the engines running. But we by that time actually already developed a lot of competency in using the technology and starting to do work for our clients with it. And so it was a very natural thing for us to then, join in with them and make a public announcement of that partnership. And our first customer, Coca-Cola, with whom we launched Create Real Magic, one of the first big enterprise uses of OpenAI. And we're continuing to do great work all over the world with dozens of our clients, growing to hundreds of our clients on the platform.
Yeah, interesting. Ted, what are the biggest misperceptions around generative AI and ChatGPT?
Yeah, I think that the number one misperception that I get frustrated with is this notion of hallucination. And hallucination is a metaphor, I guess, or an analogy to what we do as human beings, where you could as easily say lie. That's another word that's used, or make things up, right? And so the notion is, well, you can't trust this stuff because it just makes things up. And I think, first of all, it underestimates how much better the technology is getting on a regular basis here. So we're achieving, if I continue to use the word hallucination, the models are hallucinating less and less. But I also think it points to using the technology in the wrong way. And so if what you think is that you're going to, let's take the school child analogy, right? If you think as a child, you're going to get an assignment from your teacher, and plug it into ChatGPT, and then it's going to produce your essay and you're done and you just turn it in. Well, you've missed the point, right? It is a way of augmenting human activity, not replacing human activity, at least at the current stage when we talk about where it's going. But I think you have to use it with a fair measure of human judgment. So our creativity, our critical thinking is still an important part of a total package here. So that's sort of my number one complaint. The number two complaint about how people sort of misunderstand the technology is around the notion of, hey, if I put things into ChatGPT, then it becomes a part of the public model and anyone can have my information. Like, well, yeah, if you go use Facebook and put the information in Facebook, it's going to be out there in the public too, right? If you use a free product, you should expect that your information is going to be out there in the world. But you don't have to use the free product. You can pay, right? And more of this is coming. I mean, we've already been working with a sort of business-friendly version of OpenAI for a while. OpenAI itself has already converted their APIs over on the paid basis to not using the data in their public model. And you're going to see more from them about sort of open AI for business. And that sort of brings me to the third point, which is in both of those cases, what people are doing is making the mistake of looking at the technology as it exists today and saying that's all it is, rather than recognizing that this technology is developing really rapidly and that they have to be curious about, well, what's changed today? What's going to change tomorrow? Because it is going to keep changing.
Right. And do you think they're underestimating it as a result of all these misperceptions?
Well, if you just look at it today and you think that's all it is, then yes, you will underestimate the capability because you're not taking into account the improvements that are going to be made tomorrow and the next day. And you take a very simple thing. It's not simple at all, actually, but the addition of what OpenAI calls plugins. It's a quite complicated technology that they've brought, but from a user perspective, it's actually quite simple, right? You suddenly have the ability to access outside services from within ChatGPT. So you can say, what are the best flights to Athens, Greece in August? If I want to lay flat seat and I don't want to pay a lot or something like, that becomes your query. Well, it can now access Expedia to go out and do that search and find all the flights and bring them back, right? So that's an example of the extension of capabilities that we're seeing. And there'll be hundreds and then thousands and then an entire internet of resources at your fingertips over time. And that's just one example of an extension that causes people to underestimate what is possible because they don't think about how fast this is changing.
Right. What are the risks around generative AI that companies should be thinking about before rushing into this space?
Well, I think going back to the confidentiality point, I think, anytime your employees are using a free tool, that you should worry that if they put company information into that free tool, that you don't have control of that information any longer. And so I think the first thing companies should be doing is saying, how do we have a clear education and policy about how we use these tools? In particular, not putting confidential information in the free models and going and paying for it, right? I mean, if there is business value, is $5 a month per employee too much? Or, whatever at scale the pricing model will be. But there's some price at which you say, hey, like I'm getting more than $5 worth of value a month out of this. Maybe it's $20 a month. I actually pay for the plus version myself. It's $20 a month. I get much more than $20 of value every month out of it. So it's an easy decision for me. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, my example of the school child putting the prompt in and just submitting the essay comes out. It's like, well, you know what? Your employees need to actually be trained on how to use this. It is not an answer bot. It is an augmentation of what your employees are capable of. And then I think the third thing is that companies need to understand this isn't just about a new version of Microsoft Word, right? This is actually game changing in the way that we think about work. And there is an exercise that companies need to go through of rethinking what they want people doing versus what they're going to have machines doing. And coming back to my point about this is continuously changing, that this technology is getting better and better. And we need to look forward to the day when it is much more capable than it is even today. Already today, it should change a lot of what we do, but that change is going to be continuous. So organizations need to put a capability in place that is looking at how all of the work in the enterprise is done, mapping out how it's going to change today and how it's going to change tomorrow and the next day and continuously as this technology continues to evolve, and be in this rapid reinvention of the enterprise that I think every company will be going through over the next decade.
Okay. Ted, what use cases do you see rising to the surface initially? You mentioned the work that Bain's done with Coca-Cola, but give us kind of your thoughts on what use cases have been the most successful here in the early days.
Well, if I take it from a company creation perspective, and I look at the number of companies that have been built on top of these technologies in different categories, clearly the number one category is marketing right now. So whether it's image creation or text creation, it's astounding how many companies are seemingly succeeding out there, getting funding. And then right behind it, and I think maybe an even bigger long-term impact, is coding assistants, right? So,
Mhm.
so the idea that we can use these technologies to make programming faster, easier, better. We just completed a survey at Bain of 200 large software companies, companies like SS&C Blue Prism. You write software and you publish it, you sell it. That's your business, is selling software, right? And so we said to the chief technology officers and heads of development, senior folks running the product creation organizations, are you thinking about deploying a coding tool to your software developers? Over 60% said that they are already deploying. So a mix of, we're in the selection process, we're doing the rollout, or we've actually rolled it out entirely. And of the companies that had actually already rolled it out, 70% said that it has met, or most said exceeded, their expectations in terms of developer productivity. So I think it's going to be this huge revolution in software, more software created faster and of higher quality. So I think those are the two immediate low-hanging fruit sort of use cases. But I do think across the enterprise, every business activity is going to be impacted by this. And not just generative AI, but the combination of AI and automation. We sort of finally have that cusp moment where what generative AI has done for business leaders is open their eyes up to a whole set of possibilities that honestly, many of them were there with products like Blue Prism, but the business leaders weren't ready for those ideas. And this has opened up their minds and their imagination to what's possible.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how many companies that have been using automation for a long time, but haven't really started tapping into AI. Generative AI has created more desire, more, openness to exploring that than they've had before. You would have thought they would have, progressed more gradually, but it's, as you said before, everything's accelerated. Well, you can't talk about generative AI without getting into some form of AI ethics discussion. You mentioned the hallucinating word that gets used, a lot with OpenAI, for example. What are your thoughts on how ethics should be addressed in the most effective manner around this whole generative AI area?
So let me distinguish between three different ethical concerns that I think companies should have about this technology. So the first, which is not necessarily specific to how most companies operate and would use the technology, but we should be concerned as a society, as business people, that these technologies can be used by bad actors. And we already have throughout history had people who commit fraud, mislead people. And this technology allows that to happen at a much greater scale and a different level of manipulation. And so I think we need to be concerned about how these technologies are used from that perspective. Now, specifically though, to how a company thinks about how their own employees use it, because obviously most companies are not committing fraud. I think there's sort of two sides of the ethical dilemma for companies. One is, are my employees using this technology appropriately? And then the other side of it, quite different set of questions, is by deploying this technology and changing the way my company work, how am I impacting my employees? So on the first point, I think a lot has been written and talked about how these models may have bias and may make mistakes. And so employees really do need to be trained to use these tools appropriately and to have oversight over, how decisions are made based on what the output of these tools are. An example that was written about the sort of previous version of AI technology, but more mathematical analytical technology, was resume screening. And so if you train a model with a whole set of resumes of white men being hired into the job, and then you get new resumes in, regardless of the qualifications of the non-white men, the model may be biased toward hiring more white men, right? We just trained it to do that. And so we need to be cautious about that use. Similarly with errors, right? You can depend upon it to say, I looked at the population of ancient civilizations for an essay I was writing, and it came up with a number for one of the ancient civilizations that didn't sound right. And I went and did a fact check, and it was like, well, somebody had once written a fictional book that claimed that number of people had lived in that civilization. That's right. The system isn't going to make those judgment calls. You as a human being have to make those judgment calls. Always fact check, always correct, always improve what the output is. So So that's on the how you use it. On the what it's going to do to employees, I mean, I think business leaders certainly are responsible for operating businesses profitably. And if
Mhm.
you can reduce your staff to get the same or better outcomes, that is actually what your job is. You should do that. But I think we do need to worry about the speed and breadth of disruption that these technologies are going to take. And at the same time that we have a responsibility as shareholders, one of the things that I believe and Bain believes is that we actually have a whole set of stakeholders that we take care of with our businesses. So yes, we should make money for shareholders, but we should also take care of our employees, our customers, the communities that our business operate in, and the planet as a whole. And I think when you think about it as a full sort of stakeholder capitalism approach to the business, that it is imperative that leaders think about what is going to happen to those employees who are displaced. What is the training that we're going to provide? How do we help them rebuild their careers when the things that they do today are made irrelevant? How do we successfully transition over what time period, right? So I think there's a
Mhm.
set of ethical concerns about how we treat people.
Yeah. Ted, prior to the onset of ChatGPT, we were, as an industry, I think, talking a lot about things like blockchain and crypto and NFTs, all of which together play a big part of, the move toward Web 3.0, which has been much slower than the pace of generative AI. Do you think generative AI will accelerate the move to Web 3.0 in the future? Because that's been a big area of investment, obviously, in the tech world. I'm just curious your perspective on that.
Sure. Well, let's just take one facet of Web3, which is the metaverse. And I think, lots of
Hmm.
pundits are really happy to slam how stupid the metaverse is lately, right? We're definitely in the, as Gardner likes to call it, the trough of disillusionment. Oh, Meta wasted all this money. Well, I think that the metaverse, right? This sort of notion of an immersive experience in which I can interact with other people or avatars, that actually generative AI is a huge boost to that vision, because it is going to be much faster and easier now to create all the content of that metaverse that we want to be able to explore. And so I think there's some really astounding things that are going to happen in a relatively short order, where you'll be able to put on one of the new headsets from Apple and be in an immersive world in which you interact with maybe historical characters and are able to interview Abraham Lincoln about his views, going into the Civil War, and have all of that content being able to be generated by these large language models. And, we're already seeing really interesting examples of this. There was a debate between fake Bill Gates and fake Socrates
Hmm.
that somebody created.
Indeed, there was.
So I think generative AI is actually a rocket engine
Yeah.
that needs to be attached in the right way to the frame of the rocket
Right.
to be
Right.
able to be successful. But I think it's going to happen pretty quickly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a little bit ironic because most companies shut down their metaverse units prior to the onset of Chat GPT. So, maybe if the two had been flipped, it would have helped them more. But no, that's interesting perspective.
And, Dean Kamen is one of the most amazing American inventors, and rivaling any of the historical figures. I don't know if you know Dean Kamen's work, but he gave an interview about innovation. He was asked, is it really hard to come up with all these amazing ideas? He said, no, the ideas are easy. It's timing that is hard.
Timing is everything. Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Ted, you've given some great examples of where companies are starting to explore generative AI, but can you just pick out one kind of early success story that demonstrates how generative AI is helping a company achieve a strategic objective in a new and innovative way?
You had me at strategic. I mean, let's remember, right? So really, the world woke up to this technology 6 months ago. So we're 6 months in. So I think rather than trying to answer the question you asked, I'll just answer the question I wanted you to ask. Let me illustrate an example of something that's being done. And
Okay.
then we can speculate about the strategic impact of some of these things, right? Because I think it's really early days.
Fair enough.
So I have a client that is an aerospace manufacturer, and they make components that go into aircraft. When those components come off of the assembly line, they need to go through a testing process. Flight readiness is what the name of the testing process is. Make sure if you put this into an airplane, that it's going to work and the airplane doesn't crash, right? Now, both the Department of Defense and the FAA have regulations about those flight testing plans. And so they want to see, how are you going to test these components? And this company has engineers who on average spend about 5 days for each new component to develop a testing plan before it can be submitted to the DoD or FAA. Now, you would not think that that's a task that I could give generative AI with all the things we've said about, oh, it hallucinates and maybe lies or whatever. And yet what the company has done is they said, look, there is actually a pattern to these testing plans. I can train the model with a few example testing plans, and then I can give it the specifics of the new component. And in a few minutes, it will do the work, not to completion, but it can take 3 or 4 days out of the 5 days that it would normally take to create a testing plan. I still have an engineer that then takes that out of ChatGPT and looks it over and refines it and fixes it and makes sure there are no errors before it gets submitted to the DoD and the FAA. But if you can take 5 engineering days and convert it to 2 engineering days or even 1 engineering day, right? That is a huge productivity improvement. So imagine that being done across every task of the enterprise. And so this is sort of the strategically, where does this go? And I think we as companies need to think about how people are good at critical thinking, creativity, and interpersonal relationships. And those are 3 things the machines are not good at least yet. So we still want people doing those 3 things. And we need to be thinking about how everything else is done by a machine. And so I think that what it leads to strategically, though, is a complete realignment of the way we organize business. So let's sort of take the sort of biggest picture here. Why do we organize companies the way we do today? Marketing, sales, finance, business units. And it has to do with the cost of communication. Because if I have a big global organization, it's very hard as individuals to manage that organization if everyone who does different tasks is all working together. So we create all the finance people working for a finance leader and all the sales people working for a sales leader. Well, if we substantially reduce the number of people in these organizations, we have the opportunity to rethink how they are organized. And I expect that the organization of the future enterprise is going to be much more around how processes run within those organizations. So I'm going to have an end-to-end process that my company engages in, and I'm going to have a leader of that process, and I'm going to have the people and the computation that supports that process all reporting into that process leader, as opposed to a functional leader. So that is a huge strategic shift in the way that we organize society and business and productivity.
That's really interesting, Ted. I love the organization around processes as opposed to functions. And that really does align so much better to the way workforces are beginning to look. Hybrid workforces, digital and human together. So really, really good stuff. So how are you advising company leaders who are still trying to get their bearings in this space? How should they approach it?
Well, number 1, stop talking and start doing. There's way too much going on right now. I mean, I every week right now, I find myself in a boardroom of a large public company with the entire executive leadership team sitting on the edge of their chairs going, what is this thing? What does it do? I hear it hallucinates. And it's like, guys, just start experimenting, start using it. You use it yourselves, get your teams using it, start coming up with use cases in your organization where you want to apply it. It's not going to get less capable. It's only going to get more and more capable. It's already very capable. It already should be changing a lot of how we do things. And I'm shocked. I had one of our junior consultants ask me a question. It was a very simple question. It's like, we're working with a client. And it's like, well, can you give me a list of the top competitors to this client? Like, okay, this is your job. You're like the junior consultant. Go do your damn research. But I just typed in the question into ChatGPT. I said, who are the competitors in this particular market space? And, and just spat it out and I copied and pasted it back into the email and sent it back to the AC. And they're like, wow, that was fast. Thank you so much. I'm like, it was fast because I used ChatGPT, which you could have done. So I think there's a level at which, people are just insufficiently curious about this technology. Now, obviously, they're the fastest company ever to get to 100 million users of a new technology. So lots of people that are curious and are out there using it. Yeah, that's number one, is just start using it. And then I think there needs to be an exercise in which companies create this reimagination department. How are you going to reimagine what your company does and how it does it, and really start driving that change? And alongside that is, like, the hard part isn't even going to be the technology. The hard part is going to be about changing people. And so you've got to create the right education and incentives and communications so that employees say, wow, my life is better using this. I'm not scared of it. I want to use this. That's what we tell companies.
Awesome. Well, Ted, I'm going to go off the rails a little bit here as we wrap up. So last year, well before ChatGPT was even a name that we knew, Google AI engineer Blake Lemoine was put on administrative leave after suggesting that Google's Lambda AI had achieved some form of sentience. This got him in big trouble, as you know, either because he spoke publicly about it or because Google had an actual policy against sentience, or possibly both. Regardless, do you think he may have been right?
Well, I think it's important to disentangle three terms that people often use synonymously: sentience, consciousness, and self-awareness.
Okay.
So they each kind of mean something different. Sentience is the ability for an organism to respond to stimulation from its environment. And arguably, that's what we already do with machines, right? So even something as simple as optical character recognition, I give a document to a machine, I'm creating an external stimulus, and it's reacting to it. It's reading the document. But certainly what people mean by the question about sentience is, hey, is this a consciousness? Is this, is it somehow, is there some human equivalence? And so really what we talk about then is artificial general intelligence, or this notion that I can have a machine that is indistinguishable from a human. And on that, I will go with Ray Kurzweil, who's much smarter than me. And all the way back in the 1990s was already saying that by the year 2029, we will have artificial intelligence that can pass what he calls a strong Turing test. And so the notion is that the Turing test is, if I have a person in one room and a computer in the other room, and I can't see either of them, can I just through my interaction with them determine which is the human and which is the computer? And the strong Turing test is, can I have this interaction happen over a few hours? And can I have the person doing the questioning be a deep expert in technology so they can kind of know all the tricks that they could possibly pull to try to figure out which is the human, which is the machine? So 2029. Now, I think that is an entirely imaginable outcome right now, that we will have such a machine in 2029. Going back to our conversation about how businesses should react and what they should be doing, imagine you've now got a machine that you can do the same thing that you would do with a human, which is give them an arbitrary task and let it go and figure out how to accomplish that task and bring you back the right answer. That is going to be a real game changer for us as a society and as business. And I think then there is a philosophical question about, if it quacks like a duck and it flies like a duck, maybe it's a duck. So we say, if it's a machine that can fool me and make me think that it's a human being consistently on an ongoing basis and do all the things that I expect a human being to do, is it kind of equivalent to a human being? Now, I actually do think that there is a set of hard problems that we haven't sorted out about what we think that human consciousness and self-awareness and sentience really is. And we can't really answer whether a machine is sentient, to just use that as the abbreviation, until we know what a human is. Are you sentient, Brad? I mean, I see you over Zoom and it could be just a representation of a person. You could be a large language model, right? You say the right next word when we talk. So do I really know that you're sentient, right? So there's a whole deep philosophical debate about that. I think the practical matter is going to be, that we're going to treat these machines as if they are beings because they will present themselves as beings. And that is going to be a challenge to our society from another whole range of dimensions. When we actually embody this intelligence in robots and the robots are our companions, it's going to get weird.
Well, that's the understatement of the year, Ted. I once asked ChatGPT if it was smarter than HAL, the all-powerful supercomputer from 2001, A Space Odyssey. And the response from ChatGPT was, well, of course, HAL was a fictional machine. It was a movie, after all. Plus, it had a level of consciousness that made it extremely powerful. And of course, I don't have that.
The programs tell you that I don't have that.
Exactly. And I love how some of the ChatGPT responses, like the one I got to the question about how, seems to have like a little attitude in it. I don't know if that's coming from the OpenAI developers or it's coming from the internet as a whole. Who knows? Well, Ted, thank you so much for rejoining the podcast. I always enjoy hearing your thoughts on topics within the automation and AI realm. Really appreciate you delving into generative AI today. So many more exciting things to come on this front. But thanks again and be well.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.